Did we get that? Because that's probably the most important thing in Daniel chapter 9 and verse 24. What the angel says to Daniel is that 70 sevens or 70 weeks are determined, so the prophecy itself lasts for these 70 weeks. At the end of it, the prophecy is fulfilled, it is completed. And that completion is the return of Jesus Christ and the setting up of the kingdom. Very, very important for us to understand that. Now, with regards to the time itself, this is what Gabriel says to Daniel. He says, "Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the command to restore and build Jerusalem until Messiah the Prince, there shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. Got some mathematicians here. 7 and 62. 69? Excellent. Very good. 69. So we got a 70-week prophecy, but until Messiah the Prince, we go to 69. Really important. Because what we have to appreciate, that verse in that 24th verse, actually is the completion of this. Messiah the Prince is at the 69th. And whilst we acknowledge, and there's no doubt about it, that none of the conditions expressed in verse 24 could possibly come to pass without Messiah the Prince fulfilling everything that he fulfilled, the prophecy itself does not finish until 70 weeks have been completed. And if you think I'm overstressing this, it really does need stressing. Okay? Messiah the Prince is at the 69th 7. Now, the Hebrew year was calculated using the moon. So it was a lunar year, and each year was 360 days long. And it's quite important, this really. It's quite important for our calculation. I don't want to get too excited by it, but it works out astonishingly well. So if you had 69 sevens times 360 days, you would end up with 173,880 days. Okay? Or 483 lunar years, according to the Hebrew calendar. Does that make sense? Right? You people with calculators, you got that? It's absolutely true, because I actually ran it through on a calculator myself. This man, Artaxerxes Longimanus, it's not a made-up name, it's a proper name, this, issued the command on the 14th of March, 445 BC. There were earlier commands issued, but they concerned the rebuilding of the temple. This was about rebuilding the wall of Jerusalem. Right? The March 14th was actually the Passover month, the month of Nisan. And it's a very, relatively speaking, a very accurate calculation. Okay? Now, if we added 173,880 days, adjusted for leap years in between, it brings us to a few days before Passover in the month of Nisan, AD 32. And this was probably the day that Jesus rode into Jerusalem. And I remember looking at this particular part of Daniel a number of years ago, and someone who is actually sat in this audience right now, who, when we tried to figure out when it occurred, put his hand up and said, perhaps it was the day that Jesus rode into Jerusalem. And at the time I thought, yeah, that sounds okay. And I think it's probably exactly right. Because of this, look at this, it's quite astonishing really. This is what Zechariah says. Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, your king is coming to you. He is just and having salvation, lowly and riding on a donkey, a colt, the foal of a donkey. Your king is coming to you. So Zechariah, we've actually looked at this prophecy earlier. Zechariah actually said, your king will come and he will be riding on a donkey, a colt, the foal of a donkey, riding into Jerusalem. And this is exactly what Jesus Christ did about a week prior to Passover, when he was crucified and killed. So, Daniel 9 verse 25, 69 weeks until Messiah the Prince. Okay? So we've now used up those 69 weeks, and after 62, but of course we add the 7 on, Messiah shall be cut off, but not for himself. The phrase "not for himself" actually means "but without progeny." He will not have children that follow him. And this is what Isaiah says in Isaiah 53 and verse 8. He was cut off from the land of the living. For the transgression of my people he was stricken. I think that might be Arno. Now that's you. So we'll go back and give that to you.
So we can say with a lot of confidence that the 69 weeks of the 70 weeks prophecy has been fulfilled. And it was fulfilled when Jesus died on the cross, nearly 2,000 years ago. So that leaves us a dilemma. When was the 70th week? We've had the 69 weeks. When is the 70th week? So we need to look at this in a little bit more detail. Daniel goes on from what Chris has just read out in verse 26. The people of the ruler who will come will destroy the city and the sanctuary. The end will come like a flood. War will continue until the end, and desolations have been decreed. Desolations have been decreed. Where have we seen the word desolations before in this series? Anybody remember? The abomination that causes desolations, which Jesus spoke about. We'll come on to that shortly. Daniel then goes on to say, he, the prince, will confirm a covenant with many for 1/7. 1/7. The remaining 7, the 70th week. In the middle of that 7, he will put an end to sacrifice and offering, and on a wing of the temple, he will set up an abomination that causes desolation, until the end that is decreed is poured out on him. So we'll look in a moment how this joins up with what Jesus was talking about. I'll just drop back to the previous slide. So if the 70th week, or at the end of the 70th week, is when Jesus returns to restore all things, we know that that 70th week will be future. It has to be future, because Jesus hasn't come back yet. So there must be a gap, a huge gap, between the fulfillment of the 69th week, when Jesus was crucified, and the last 70th week. So this prophecy jumps and moves now to this final 70th week, which we're now going to look at in a bit more detail. Okay, to help us look at that, we're going to imagine a timeline of this 70th week, Daniel's 70th week. And nearest me is the beginning, and the other side the end. And the end, like all the prophecies of the end time events, finishes with the return of the Lord Jesus Christ, when God intervenes with the affairs of this world. Daniel chapter 9 verse 27 tells us, He, and this is the same He for the little horn, the same He for the king of fierce countenance, the same He for what we can call the Antichrist that stands up against Christ when he returns. He will confirm a covenant with many for 1/7, which we believe to be future and the final week of this prophecy. And we know that 1 week, 1/7, is 7 years. Because going back to the calculation that Chris did, we can work out the days, we can work out the years of 483, I think it was, for 69 weeks, which accurately predicted Jesus arriving at Jerusalem. So with a lot of confidence, we can say that that period is 7 years. There's other evidence in Revelation and other passages in Daniel that that period is 7 years. And it starts with a covenant. He will confirm a covenant with many. We know the with many, in the context it's being said, is Israel. So there is some sort of promise, some sort of covenant with Israel for 1/7. Here we go. So that's where it starts. It starts with some sort of agreement, some sort of treaty with Israel, which will be for 7 years. Thessalonians talks about this. While people are saying peace and safety, destruction will come on them suddenly as labour pains on a pregnant woman. Where have we heard about labour pains before in this series? The Olivet prophecy, when Jesus was talking about an escalation in end-time events, were like labour pains. Here we are starting to join the dots. And they will not escape, Thessalonians says. So, peace and safety, when people are talking about peace and safety and security in the land of Israel. And peace and safety and security, of course, is one of the major problems in the world at the moment in the Middle East. And there's huge focus, there has been for many years, particularly since the rise of the Arab nations and the oil and the establishment of the beacon of democracy, Israel, in the Middle East. And many rulers, presidents have tried to fix this ongoing problem in the Middle East and secure a peace treaty between Israel and its neighbours. And they've all failed to a degree. There's been limited treaties with some of the countries, but there's been no genuine peace treaty that secures and delivers peace and safety in that area as yet. Now, one of the descriptions we looked at last time for this little horn, for this king of fierce countenance, the Antichrist, is that he comes in peace. He comes in peace but deceives the world. But at the moment, I'd really like you to just focus on the fact that this period, which is future, starts with a 7-year peace treaty. And to underline that, I've got a video clip and for you to understand how important to the world and world leaders that we have this peace in the Middle East, in this area.
Of the borders of 1967, that will live in
peace and security.
The lesson of history is that peace and security do not come easily.
Peace and stability that people on all sides long for.
2 states for 2 peoples living side by side in peace and security is not a vague slogan, but a real necessity for the stability in the entire region.
Israel and Palestinians, they can live side by side in peace and security. This is our vision and this is our commitment.
My hopes and dreams for Israel are to live in peace,
to live in peace and security.
Two states living side by side in peace and security. True security for all Israelis. We will also pursue peace between Israel and Lebanon,
in peace and security,
Israel and Syria,
Peace and security.
and a broader peace between Israel and its many neighbors. Must decide whether we are serious about peace and security. To recognize Israel's legitimacy and its right to exist in peace and security. That's how we will find new pathways to peace and security. That is the work that we must do.
In peace and security.
Peace and security and coexistence.
A movement towards peace. If we have this triangle, economy, security, and peace, then peace can succeed.